Sign the contract, Lady Beatrice, or I will ensure your family name disappears from every ledger, every club, every drawing room in England. He said it quietly, the way powerful men always do when they want you to understand they don't need to shout. Edward Ashbourne married her believing she was the daughter of a thief. She married him knowing he hated her. What neither of them knew, what someone had spent 8 years making sure they would never discover, was that the real debt ran the other direction entirely. If you've ever been blamed for something you didn't do, this story is for you. Stay with us. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is exactly the kind of story we tell every week. 3 weeks before the wedding, Beatrice Holloway received a letter. No return address. No signature. The envelope was plain cream stock, the kind sold at any stationer's shop in London. But the handwriting was careful too. Careful, the deliberate slant of someone who had practiced disguising their hand. She opened it at her writing desk before her maid arrived, before the house stirred. One sentence centered on the page like a verdict. Do not marry the Duke of Ashbourne. Your father did not destroy his family. Beatrice read it twice. She folded it. She pressed it flat against the desk and read it a third time. Then she locked it in the small cedar box where she kept her mother's letters. Her first instinct was that someone wanted to frighten her. That was understandable. A young woman of 24 marrying a duke attracted the usual parade of gossip and ill will. Rivals. Jealous mothers with unmarried daughters. Men who had offered for her and been refused. But her second instinct stopped her cold. Whoever wrote that letter knew what had happened 8 years ago. Not the rumor. Not the polished drawing room version that society had agreed upon. The actual thing, the specific accusation that had followed her family like a shadow since she was 16 years old. Her father, Lord Holloway, had allegedly defrauded the late Duke of Ashbourne in a land arrangement gone wrong. That was the polished version. The private version, whispered in clubs and carriages, was that her father had taken money he was trusted to invest and put it somewhere. It was never seen again. The late Duke had died before any suit could be filed. His son Edward, the present Duke, had inherited the title, the lands, the debts, and the story. The story, most of all. Beatrice had been 16 when it started. She remembered the year her father stopped sleeping. She remembered the letters he burned in the fireplace before she could read them. She remembered the morning he came to breakfast and looked at her mother with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Something raw, something almost like grief, and said nothing at all. Her father died 4 years later. Heart failure, the physician said. Her mother said it was the weight of a name being slowly destroyed. Beatrice believed her mother. She also believed the letter. The formal introduction to Edward Ashbourne had taken place 6 months earlier at the Fairfax Winter Ball. She had known who he was before they spoke. Everyone knew who Edward Ashbourne was. 32 years old, the youngest duke in 3 generations of his line. Serious beyond his years, people said. Cold, said others. Competent, said the men who dealt with him in business. Dangerous, said the ones who had tried to cross him. How was tall in the way that men of old families often were built for standing in large rooms and looking as though the room had been arranged around them. Dark hair. A face that suggested he had stopped being young some years before his age actually required it. He had asked her to dance, politely, correctly, with the slight formality of a man who had been taught that every social gesture carries weight. She had accepted, correctly, with the composure her mother had spent 20 years instilling in her. They had danced without speaking for most of the first measure. Then he said very quietly, "Your father is dead." It was not a question. It was not offered as condolence. It was the kind of statement a man makes when he is establishing facts before a negotiation. 4 years ago, Beatrice said, and your mother manages the Holloway estate. With some assistance, yes. She does it well, I'm told. Beatrice looked at him then directly, which was not entirely appropriate, but she had decided years ago that direct was the only way she knew how to survive. You've inquired about my family. I inquire about everyone I dance with. That seems exhausting. Something shifted in his expression, not quite amusement. Something adjacent to it, the recognition of an unexpected answer. It is, Edward said, relentlessly. They finished the dance. He returned her to her mother with a correct bow. He walked away without looking back. She watched him cross the room and thought, this man has already made up his mind about something. I simply don't know yet what it is. The courtship, if one could call it that, proceeded with the same quality of formal calculation. Calls made at appropriate hours. Flowers correctly chosen. Attendance at the same events. Proximity managed within the bounds of what society required. He never said anything warm, but he also never said anything cruel. Her mother thought him promising. Her aunt thought him remote. Her own assessment was that Edward Ashbourne was a man conducting a transaction and executing it with great precision. She knew she should have asked more questions. She asked herself later why she hadn't. The answer was always the same. She had believed that marrying a duke would restore what her family had lost. The name, the standing, the quiet dignity that had been eroding for 8 years. She had believed that if she conducted herself correctly, if she brought nothing but grace and competence into this arrangement, the truth would eventually surface on its own. She had believed that for a very long time. The letter changed things. 2 days after she received it, she went to find Edward. He was at his London townhouse in Grosvenor Square, in the middle of what his secretary called a full morning. She sent up her card and waited in the downstairs sitting room for 11 minutes, she counted, before he appeared. Lady Beatrice. He did not sit. This is unexpected. I apologize for arriving without notice. She did not apologize in her voice, only in her words, which was the acceptable form. I need to speak with you about something before the wedding. If it concerns the arrangements. It doesn't. She waited while the door closed behind his secretary. Your Grace, I need to know what you believe happened between our fathers. The quality of the room changed. It was subtle something in how he stood, how his attention sharpened without any visible movement. I don't think that's a useful conversation. I've received information suggesting it may be a necessary one. From whom? Anonymous. A letter. His expression told her precisely nothing. And you came to me with an anonymous letter. I came to you with a question. The letter simply prompted it. She kept her voice even. What do you believe my father did? A long pause. The kind men of his position used when they were deciding not how much to say, but how much they could say without saying anything. I believe, Edward said finally, that the past does not change what the future requires. That isn't an answer. It's the answer I'm prepared to give. Then let me give you one. Beatrice stood. She had not intended to stand, but staying seated while he hovered above her felt suddenly wrong. Whatever you have been told about my father, I need you to understand that I am not responsible for it, that I have never been responsible for it, and that if there is a debt you believe exists, it is not mine to pay. Something moved through his eyes, surprise possibly at the directness, or recognition of it. No one, he said carefully, has asked you to pay anything. Not in those words, Beatrice said. No. She left. She descended the stairs without hurrying. She climbed into her carriage. She told the driver to take her home. She did not cry until she was halfway back to Mayfair, and even then, it was only for a moment. That evening she wrote to her mother. She did not tell her about the letter. She did not tell her about the visit to Edward. She asked very carefully whether her mother remembered a man named Thomas Reed. Thomas Reed had been her father's private secretary for 11 years. He had left the Holloway employ 6 months before her father died. At the time, Beatrice had been told simply that his position had been discontinued. It happened. Households changed. She had not thought much of it. She was thinking of it now. Her mother's reply came the following morning, written in the small, careful hand of a woman who had learned that letters could be read by anyone. I remember Mr. Reed. He was a good and honest man. I do not know where he went. Your father was very sad to see him go. Beatrice read it 3 times. Her mother had written sad, not relieved, not resigned. Sad. And she had called Reed honest. A private secretary who was honest and whose departure made his employer sad was not a man who had been dismissed for cause. He was a man who had been let go because someone else required it. The next morning she began to ask questions. She was careful about it. Beatrice had grown up understanding that in society, the manner of a question mattered almost as much as the answer. Ask too directly, and people closed. Ask sideways in the language of social concern, and they often told you more than they meant to. She called on 3 women whose husbands had dealings with her father. She visited the Holloway solicitor on the pretext of clarifying a detail in her marriage settlement. She spent an afternoon in her father's correspondence files, the ones her mother had kept organized by year, tied with brown ribbon. What she found was largely what she expected, the normal business of a landowner's life. Letters about tenants and harvests and drainage. Invitations. A few personal notes from men she recognized. What she did not find was anything related to the Ashbourne land arrangement. Not one letter. Not one figure. Not one reference to a negotiation of any kind. 8 years of correspondence, and the thing that had destroyed her family's name was simply not there. That absence told her more than a full file cabinet could have. She was in the back parlor, reviewing what she had gathered when her maid brought another card. Sir Julian Vane. She knew the name. Everyone who moved in the circles her family did knew Sir Julian Vane. He was 50 years old, precisely as old as his reputation. A man of impeccable manners, significant political connections, and the kind of quiet authority that came not from birth, but from 40 years of knowing where all the bodies were buried. He had been a close advisor to the late Duke of Ashbourne. He remained a close advisor to the present one. Beatrice told the maid to show him in. He entered with the relaxed confidence of a man who had never once been kept waiting and expected that pattern to continue. He was dressed immaculately. He carried a walking stick he did not need. He smiled at her in the way that meant nothing. "Lady Beatrice, forgive the intrusion. I happened to be in the neighborhood." He had not happened to be in the neighborhood. Men like Julian Vane did not happen. They arranged. "Sir Julian." She gestured toward the chair across from hers. "Please sit." He sat. He set the walking stick across his knees. He looked around the room with the practiced appreciation of a man assessing property. "I understand," he said pleasantly, "that you paid a call on His Grace yesterday morning." News traveled quickly in Grosvenor Square. "I did. Pre-wedding nerves are entirely natural, particularly in a first marriage. I have very steady nerves, Sir Julian." He smiled again. "Of course you do. Your mother raised you well." A pause. A small one. The kind designed to let a compliment sink before what follows it. "I only wanted to call and express my hope that whatever conversation you had with His Grace was productive." We spoke briefly. Brevity is a gift. He tilted his head slightly. "Lady Beatrice, you are a sensible woman. I have always thought so. What happened between your father and the late Duke was a complicated and painful matter for everyone involved. There is nothing to be gained by revisiting it. The present Duke understands this. I believe with your good sense, you will as well." She looked at him for a long moment. "What if it wasn't complicated?" she said. "What if it was quite simple, and the complexity is something that was added afterward?" Julian Vane did not change expression. He was too good for that. But she watched his hands, and his hands tightened slightly on the walking stick. "History," he said, "is rarely as simple as we wish it had been." "No," Beatrice said. "But debts usually are. You either owe one or you don't." He stood. He adjusted his gloves. He walked toward the door with the unhurried certainty of a man who had accomplished what he came to do. At the threshold he paused. "The wedding is in 3 weeks," he said. "It would be a shame if anything were to complicate what promises to be a very advantageous arrangement for your family." He left. Beatrice sat very still. She listened to his footsteps in the hall, the sound of the front door, the faint noise of a carriage pulling away from the curb. Then she stood. She went to her writing desk. She sat down and wrote in her clearest hand a letter to a woman named Mrs. Partridge, who had once been the housekeeper at Holloway and was now retired in Harrogate. She did not ask about her father. She asked about Thomas Reed. She asked where he had gone. The reply took 4 days. 4 days in which the wedding preparations continued. fittings, menus. The endless social machinery of two families being formally joined. Edward called once. They sat in the drawing room for 40 minutes and discussed the arrangements for the reception at Ashbourne House. He was correct. She was composed. At no point did either of them say anything that mattered. When he left, she stood at the window and watched his carriage disappear around the corner, and thought, "We are very good at this. We are both very good at performing exactly what is expected of us and saying nothing real at all." She wondered if he felt it. The falseness. The performance. She suspected he did. She suspected he had been performing for a very long time. Mrs. Partridge's letter arrived on a Thursday. It was short. Mr. Reed did not leave England. He did not leave Yorkshire. He is in Leeds in lodgings near the Cloth Hall. He told me once some years ago that he kept everything. I did not understand what he meant. I believe now he meant papers. Beatrice read it. She folded it. She put it in the cedar box with the anonymous letter and her mother's note. 3 weeks. She had 3 weeks before she became the Duchess of Ashbourne. She began to plan what she would do with them. She did not write to Thomas Reed directly. That would be too visible, too easily intercepted by someone who had already sent a man to her parlor once to issue a warning dressed as a social call. Instead, she wrote to her cousin Geoffrey, who had no connection to anything that mattered and could therefore be trusted to travel to Leeds and find a retired secretary without attracting any attention whatsoever. Geoffrey was 22 and delighted by anything that felt like a mission. He wrote back within 48 hours. "Reed is alive and in reasonable health. He was alarmed when I arrived, but more alarmed when I said your name. He asked how much you knew. I told him only that something was wrong and that you were about to marry the Ashbourne Duke. He said, and I am quoting him precisely, 'Then she needs to know what I have before she says her vows.'" Beatrice put the letter down. She picked it up. She read it again. "He needs to come to London." She wrote back to Geoffrey before the ink on his letter had fully dried. "Tell him I will pay his travel. Tell him I will meet him wherever he chooses. Tell him I promise he will be protected." It was the last promise she was not entirely certain she could keep. 2 days before the wedding, a messenger arrived at Grosvenor Square. He carried a sealed envelope addressed to the Duke of Ashbourne, marked urgent and private, in a hand that Edward did not recognize. Inside was a document, 12 pages closely written, a summary of accounts, letters reproduced by hand, and at the end 2 signatures. One was her father's, one was the late Duke's. The document appeared to show in detail that Lord Holloway had received funds from the Ashbourne estate and failed to return them. It was dated. It was organized. It was to any reasonable eye thorough and damning. Edward read it twice. He sent for his solicitor. His solicitor read it and said it appeared in order. He sent for Sir Julian. Julian read it and looked grave in the way men look when something is precisely what they expected. "I thought she might do this," Julian said. "Do what?" "Try to find a way to cast doubt before the wedding. Lady Beatrice is not a foolish woman, Your Grace. She will do what she can to muddy the picture." He set the document down carefully. "This appears to be an attempt to produce something, anything that creates uncertainty." Edward looked at the signatures. At his father's name reproduced in the familiar hand he had grown up reading on holiday letters and correspondence about the harvest. I thought of her sitting across from him in her parlor, saying, "If there is a debt you believe exists, it is not mine to pay." He thought she had sounded absolutely certain. He thought I cannot tell even now whether that certainty is honesty or performance. He summoned his carriage. He went to the Holloway house. She received him in the drawing room. Her maid was present appropriately. She was wearing a gray morning dress, and her expression when he entered was the expression of someone who had been waiting for him. That more than anything gave him pause. "You wanted the truth," he said. He set the document on the table between them. "Here it is." She looked at the document. She did not touch it. She bent forward slightly and read the first page, then the last. Then she said very quietly, "May I see the second signature? The one beside my father's name." He turned to the page. She looked at it for a long time. "The signature is correct," she said. "My father's hand. I would know it anywhere." A pause. "But the seal isn't." He looked at the seal. The Holloway family seal in red wax. "What do you mean?" "My father's seal had a crack in the lower left corner. It cracked when he dropped the stamp in 1878. He never replaced it because he said a cracked seal was a seal that could not be forged." She looked up at him. "Every document my father signed after 1878 carries a cracked seal. That one doesn't." Edward stared at the seal. He stared at it for a very long time. He picked up the document. He looked at every sealed page. Every one of them was perfectly smooth, perfectly whole. The silence in the room was the loudest thing Beatrice had ever heard. "I cannot prove the rest," she said. "I know that. I have no counter-document, no witness present to speak to the forgery. All I have is that crack." Her voice was level. "But I am asking you, Your Grace, one time before we stand before God and make our promises. I am asking you to consider the possibility that you have been given a reason to hate my family that was manufactured by someone who needed you to believe it." Edward said nothing. He rolled the document. He tucked it under his arm. He stood at the edge of the room with the expression of a man who had just discovered that the floor he had been standing on for 8 years might be built over something he had never examined. "I need to think," he said. "Yes," Beatrice said. "You do." He left. She sat in the drawing room for a very long time after his footsteps faded. The house was quiet. The wedding was in 2 days. Thomas Reed was somewhere in this city, carrying papers that had waited 8 years to be read. And Edward Ashbourne was somewhere in his carriage holding a document with a perfect seal, finally asking himself why in all the years he had spent certain of what happened, he had never once thought to look at the wax. The morning after Edward left her drawing room, Beatrice woke before 5 o'clock and did not go back to sleep. She lay in the dark and thought about the seal. The small, perfect, uncracked seal on a document that should have been impossible to produce without her father's actual stamp. She thought about who would have had access to Holloway correspondence long enough to study it. Long enough to know what her father's signature looked like. Long enough to reproduce everything correctly, except one detail that only someone who had lived inside that household would have noticed. She thought about Thomas Reed somewhere in this city, now carrying papers he had kept for 8 years. She rose at 5:30. She wrote 2 letters before her maid arrived. One to Geoffrey telling him to bring Reed to a specific address, not the Holloway house, not anywhere connected to her family. A tea room on Mortimer Street that her mother's old friend Mrs. Caulfield owned, and where Beatrice had been a regular visitor since she was 17. Safe. Unremarkable. Populated by exactly the kind of women that men like Julian Vane never noticed. The second letter she wrote to her solicitor, Mr. Aldous Pemberton, asking him to locate the original deed records from the Ashbourne land arrangement of 1879. Not copies. Originals. The kind of records that if they existed would be filed with the county registry and could not be altered without leaving traces. She sealed both letters before her maid could see the addresses. She sent them out with the first footman of the morning, a young man named Patrick, who had been with the household since before her father died, and whose loyalty she had always believed was to the Holloway name, rather than to whoever happened to be paying his wages. Then she went down to breakfast, and ate with the composed appetite of a woman who had not spent the last 4 hours assembling a plan she wasn't certain would work. Her mother joined her at 7:30. Lady Holloway was 53, still handsome in the way of women who had been beautiful and then weathered something, and she had the particular skill of reading her daughter's face that she had developed over many years of practice. "You haven't slept," her mother said. "I slept adequately." Beatrice. Her mother poured tea for both of them, set the pot down, looked at her directly. "What is happening?" A long pause. Outside, the sound of a cart on the street. The ordinary morning sounds of London carrying on regardless. "I think someone has been lying to us," Beatrice said, "for a very long time, and I think the wedding is the mechanism by which that lie gets sealed permanently." Her mother did not look surprised. She looked like someone who had suspected something for years and had just been given permission to say so. "Your father tried to tell me something the week before he died, Lady Holloway said. He started a letter. He didn't finish it. I found it in his desk after the funeral, half a page, his handwriting getting worse as it went on. She set down her cup. He wrote they will come for the papers after I am gone. Make sure she knows where I kept the real ones. Beatrice stared at her mother. You never told me this. I didn't know what it meant. And you were 20 years old, and I thought... Her mother stopped, looked down at her hands. I thought protecting you meant not giving you things you couldn't use. Where, Beatrice said very carefully, did father keep the real ones? Her mother looked up. The Harrogate house. The one we let go after he died. Your father had a false panel in the study wall behind the clock. I assumed it was empty by the time we sold the property. Beatrice put down her fork. You assumed. I was grieving. I didn't... Mother. She kept her voice even with the effort of someone holding something very heavy. Who bought the Harrogate house? Her mother's face shifted, the particular shift of a woman who is about to say something she does not want to say, and has just realized she cannot avoid it. It was purchased through a solicitor's firm, Lady Holloway said slowly. I never knew the actual buyer. The solicitor handled everything. A man named... She pressed 2 fingers to her lips, reaching for it. Cresswell. His firm was called Cresswell & Associates. Beatrice was already reaching for a pen. Cresswell & Associates was a perfectly respectable firm, with offices on Bedford Row. It also, she happened to know, because her cousin Geoffrey had once used them for a property matter, operated as the preferred legal agent for a specific set of clients who valued discretion above all else. One of those clients Geoffrey had mentioned in passing 18 months ago was Sir Julian Vane. She went to Mortimer Street at 11 o'clock, arriving on foot from 2 streets over the way she used to arrive at Mrs. Caulfield's as a girl when she wanted to visit without her mother knowing. Geoffrey was already there at a corner table near the back. Beside him sat a man Beatrice had not seen in 8 years. Thomas Reed was 60 now, or close to it. He had the look of a man who had spent years being careful in how he moved, careful in how he dressed, careful in how little space he occupied. He stood when she approached. His hands, she noticed, were not steady. Lady Beatrice. Mr. Reed. She sat. She looked at him. You kept everything. I kept everything, he confirmed. Because I knew the day would come when keeping it was the only thing standing between the truth and burial. She waited. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and produced a folded packet, not large but thick. He set it on the table between them and kept his hand flat on top of it for a moment, as if it might escape. Your father did not defraud anyone, he said. The land arrangement in 1879 was a legitimate transaction. The Ashbourne estate needed to raise capital quickly. Your father agreed to act as an intermediary to use Holloway funds to secure a short-term position in a coal rights contract and return the Ashbourne investment at a profit within 18 months. He paused. That is what the original agreement said. That is what both men signed. And the money was returned, Beatrice said. Every pound. With the agreed interest. I arranged the transfer myself. I have the receipts. He lifted his hand from the packet. The problem was what happened afterward. Sir Julian. Reed looked at her with something she couldn't quite identify. Not surprise exactly, but the expression of a man who has spent years hoping someone would arrive at the right answer without being told. Sir Julian, he said, was advising the late Duke on his finances. The Duke was not a well man in his final years, not in his mind, I mean. He was confused frequently. He trusted Sir Julian completely. A breath. When the Ashbourne money was returned, Julian told the Duke it had never come back. He produced figures that showed the Holloway debt still outstanding. The Duke believed him. He died believing it. Another pause heavier than the first. And he left a letter to his son, telling him that the Holloways had robbed them, telling him the present Duke to remember it. Beatrice sat with that for a moment. The enormity of it. Edward had spent 8 years carrying a dead man's lie. Why didn't you speak out? She asked. After the Duke died. After my father died. Reed's hands came together on the table. Because Julian Vane made it very clear to me that I would not be believed, that I was a discharged servant with a grievance, that any records I produced would be challenged, that my life, my livelihood, my reputation existed at his sufferance. He met her eyes. I was afraid, Lady Beatrice. I am not proud of it, but I was afraid. She looked at the packet on the table. Are these enough? She asked. To prove it. They are enough to begin, he said. Whether they are enough to finish that depends on what you are willing to do with them, and what he is willing to hear. He, Edward. The man who at this precise moment was somewhere across London conducting his own investigation, not to find the truth, but to prove she was lying. She did not go back to the Holloway house immediately. She went first to see her solicitor. Aldous Pemberton was a small, precise man of 65 who had handled Holloway legal matters since before Beatrice was born. He had the quality of a man who had seen everything and been surprised by nothing for many years. When she entered his office without an appointment, he looked up, assessed her expression, and told his clerk to cancel the rest of his morning. She laid out what she knew. She showed him the letter from Mrs. Partridge. She told him about Reed, about the packet, about the cracked seal on the forged document. She told him about Julian Vane and the Harrogate House and Cresswell and Associates. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. The county registry records, he said finally. I had my clerk pull them this morning as you requested. He opened a file on his desk and turned it to face her. The original deed for the 1879 land arrangement shows the Ashbourne funds were received by the Holloway estate. There is no corresponding record of repayment, because repayment of that nature would not have been a matter of public record. It would have been handled privately. Which is exactly what Reed described. Yes. He folded his hands. Lady Beatrice, what you have is suggestive. It is not conclusive. Reed's testimony, plus his documents, if challenged by Vane's resources, by the Ashbourne family solicitor, by 8 years of accepted story, it will be a long and expensive and visible fight. He paused. And you are to be married in 2 days. I know that. The Duke, Pemberton said carefully, is not currently your ally in this. Also something I know. He looked at her over his spectacles. What do you want me to do? She thought of Edward in her drawing room, holding the forged document with the perfect seal. She thought of his face when she told him about the crack, the very particular quality of a man trying to hold a certain truth steady, while another one pushed against it. I want you to write to the Ashbourne family solicitor, she said. Not accusing, not demanding, simply requesting a meeting. Tell him new documentation has come to light regarding the 1879 arrangement, and that it may materially affect the interests of both families. Pemberton raised an eyebrow. That will reach the Duke before morning. Yes, Beatrice said. It will. It reached Edward before evening. He was in his study at Grosvenor Square with his own solicitor, a methodical man named Hartley, who had been with the Ashbourne family for 20 years when the letter arrived from Pemberton's office. Hartley read it. His expression did not change, which was itself a form of change for a man whose face was normally as legible as a balance sheet. Lady Beatrice has retained documentation, Hartley said, relating to the original transaction. Edward had spent the afternoon trying to verify the document Julian had provided him. He had sent Hartley to 2 different sources. Neither had returned anything useful. The document appeared correct in every way he could examine, every way, except the one Beatrice had pointed out. The one he could not stop thinking about. What kind of documentation? She hasn't specified. She is requesting a meeting. Hartley set the letter down. Your Grace, I want to advise caution. We do not know what she has or what she intends to do with it. The timing 2 days before the wedding is not coincidental. No, Edward said. It isn't. She may be attempting to use whatever she holds as leverage, to renegotiate the terms of the settlement, to extract a concession before the ceremony. Edward looked at the letter. He thought of Beatrice sitting across from him with the forged document on the table between them, not touching it. Just reading. Just identifying the one thing that shouldn't have been perfect. Or, he said slowly. She may simply have found something that changes what we believe happened. Hartley said nothing, which was his way of expressing disagreement without committing to it. Send a reply, Edward said. Tell Pemberton I will meet him, not Lady Beatrice. Pemberton, tomorrow morning. He went to find Julian that evening. Julian was at his club in the reading room with the settled look of a man who had arranged for the evening to be exactly as he expected it. You've heard from Pemberton, Julian said before Edward had sat down. The speed of that, the fact that Julian already knew, hit Edward like something cold. How do you know that? Because I know how Lady Beatrice thinks. Julian closed his book. She is a resourceful young woman. She is trying to protect her family's name. It is entirely understandable. It is also, I'm afraid, a last effort. He looked at Edward steadily. Your Grace, I have served this family for 22 years. I served your father loyally. Whatever she has produced, whatever story she has constructed, I urge you to remember that she has a very great deal to gain from creating doubt. Yes, Edward said. And so do you. The room was very quiet. Julian held his gaze with the practiced ease of a man who had survived many rooms. I don't know what you mean by that, Julian said. I mean that you have also benefited from this family's certainty about what happened. You have been trusted, consulted, relied upon for 8 years, partly because we believe you were the person who understood our father's affairs. If the understanding is wrong... Edward paused. Then so is the trust. Julian smiled. Not the pleasant social smile. Something underneath it smaller and more careful. This is her influence. This is a question, Edward said, that I am going to need answered. He left the club. He walked back to Grosvenor Square in the dark because he needed to think, and he could not think sitting still. He thought about his father, a man he had loved and tried to live up to, whose dying words on the subject of honor had become the architecture of 8 years. He thought about the letter his father had left him kept in the top drawer of his study desk, read so many times he had stopped needing to read it. The Holloways took from us. Remember what we are owed. He thought about a cracked seal. He thought about a young woman sitting in a morning dress with the kind of composure that did not come from innocence or from guilt, but from something else entirely, from years of holding something terrible and deciding not to break under it. He had been so certain. He had been certain the way his father was certain, the way men learned certainty from other men and called it honor. I went home. He took the forged document from his desk. He held it under the lamp and looked at the seal for a very long time. Then he took out his father's letter and read it. All of it. Every word. Slowly, the way he used to read it when he was 24 and raw with grief and needed something to hold on to. His father had been a good man. He had also, Edward now considered for the first time with genuine seriousness, been an old man at the end. Confused people had said, though no one said it directly, because you did not say such things about a duke, trusting, dependent on the counsel of men close to him, dependent on Julian. He put the letter down. He sat at his desk in the dark for a long time. He did not sleep until nearly 3 in the morning, and what finally pulled him under was not peace, but the exhaustion of a man who had spent 8 years standing on ground he had just discovered he had never examined. The meeting with Pemberton happened at 9:30 the following morning. Beatrice was not there. That was deliberate. She had discussed it with Pemberton the night before, understanding that if Edward felt ambushed, if he felt that she had maneuvered him into a confrontation, his instinct would be to refuse rather than to hear. A duke's pride was not a small thing. It was in many ways the only tool she had been given to work with. Pemberton was precise and careful. He laid out what Reed had said. He showed Hartley the receipts, the actual bank documents in Reed's hand, showing the transfer of funds from the Holloway account to the Ashbourne estate account in March of 1881. Hartley read every page without expression. Then he said, "These could have been fabricated." "They could," Pemberton said. "As could the document your client received 2 days ago from Sir Julian Vane. The difference is that these were produced by a man who has had no contact with the Holloway family for 8 years and no knowledge of the recent events surrounding this marriage. And they carry the stamp of Barclays Bank, which I believe you can verify independently." Hartley looked at the bank stamp for a long time. "I will need to take these for review," he said. "Of course." Pemberton had already anticipated this and had copies made. "Take them. Verify what you can. I only ask that you advise your client that what he is about to do in 2 days' time cannot be undone, and that he should be certain of his ground before he does it." Edward was not at this meeting. He had sent Hartley alone. Beatrice understood this too, that he was not yet ready to sit in a room with her solicitor and be told directly that his certainty of 8 years might be built on another man's crime. Hartley took the copies. He left. Pemberton looked at Beatrice, who had been in his private office the entire time, the door left slightly ajar. "He will take them to Ashbourne," she said. "Yes, and then we wait." She hated waiting. She had always hated it. But she had also learned in the years since her father died that the women who survived this world were not the ones who acted the fastest. They were the ones who knew precisely when to move and when to hold absolutely still and let the truth do the work that force could not. She went home. She sat with her mother. They did not speak much. Her mother read. Beatrice looked out the window at the street and thought about Edward in his study at Grosvenor Square, reading bank receipts that would tell him that the man he had trusted most was the man who had lied to him longest. She thought about what he would feel. Not satisfaction. She felt no satisfaction. She thought about what it was like to discover that your grief had been used as a weapon. That your love for a dead man had been turned into an instrument pointed at someone who had done nothing wrong. She knew what that felt like. She had been living it since she was 16. Evening came. No word from Grosvenor Square. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and counted the hours until the wedding. One day, somewhere across the city, Edward Ashbourne was reading documents that were dismantling something he had spent 8 years building. She could not be in the room for that. She could not reach across the distance and tell him she understood how it felt, because he was not yet the kind of man who would accept that from her. But she thought, lying in the dark with 1 day left, that he would be. If he was what she had begun to believe he was, underneath the formality, underneath the certainty, underneath 8 years of a dead man's instruction. Then the man who had left her drawing room looking at a perfect seal had already started to become that man. She did not know if it was enough. She fell asleep before she could decide. The message arrived at 7:30 in the morning, delivered personally by Hartley to Pemberton's office, with a request that Lady Beatrice be informed immediately. Pemberton sent his clerk to the Holloway house at a run. Beatrice was at her writing desk when the clerk arrived, breathless, with a sealed note. She opened it. Hartley had verified the bank records. The transfer was real. The funds had been returned to the Ashbourne account in March of 1881, 11 months before the late Duke died, channeled through a sub-account that Julian Vane had sole authority over. The money had never reached the Duke. It had stopped with Julian. For 8 years, Vane had been the sole repository of funds that should have cleared the Holloway name, sitting on the proof that the debt had been paid, letting two families, one of them his own patrons, build their entire relationship to each other on a foundation of manufactured guilt. Beatrice read the note once. She folded it. She set it flat on the desk. Then she stood, straightened her dress, and asked her maid to tell the coachman to bring the carriage around. She was going to Grosvenor Square. Not because she had won. Not because the truth had surfaced and everything was resolved. Because Edward Ashbourne had just discovered that the person he had trusted the longest had betrayed him, and for all his formality, for all his certainty, for all the armor that a lifetime of ducal obligation had built around him, he was underneath all of it, a man who had loved his father. And she knew what it was to lose someone and then discover the loss had been stolen from you. She was going, not as his fiancée, not as a Holloway defending her name, as the only person in London who understood exactly what he was feeling in that room. The carriage pulled away from the Holloway house and moved through the morning streets toward Grosvenor Square. She did not know what she would find when she arrived. She did not know if he would let her in or if he would be. By the time she reached his door, already inside, something too private and too raw for her presence to help. But she had spent 8 years learning that the worst thing a person could do with the truth was wait until it was convenient to use it. She was done waiting. The carriage reached Grosvenor Square at 10 minutes past 8. Beatrice did not send up her card. She told the footman at the door that she needed to see the Duke immediately, that it was not a social call, and that if he was told a Lady Holloway was asking for him, he would understand the difference. The footman, young, uncertain, clearly not prepared for a woman arriving without appointment on the morning before her own wedding, disappeared for 3 minutes and returned with a look that told her everything before he spoke. "His Grace will see you, my lady. He asks that you come to the study." The study, not the drawing room, not the formal receiving room where guests were managed and distances maintained. The study was where Edward Ashbourne actually lived, where he worked, where he thought, where the walls held the real contents of the life beneath the title. She followed the footman up the stairs. The door was open. Edward was standing at the window with his back to her, and the quality of how he was standing, the set of his shoulders, the particular stillness of a man who has not moved in a long time, because moving would require deciding what to do next, told her that Hartley had already been there, already told him. She stepped inside. The footman withdrew. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "You verified the bank records," she said. It was not a question. Hartley verified them. He did not turn from the window. March of 1881. The funds cleared a Holloway account into an Ashbourne sub-account, an account Julian managed exclusively, and never transferred to your father, and never transferred to my father. A pause, long and heavy. My father died in January of 1882. He spent the last year of his life believing he had been robbed, writing letters to his son telling him to remember the debt, building something in me that, he stopped, that I carried. She said nothing. She let it sit because it needed to sit. He used my father's confusion, Edward said. He waited until the old man couldn't track his own accounts anymore, and then he simply didn't pass the money through, kept it, and gave my father a story that explained why it hadn't come. He turned from the window, then finally, and his face was not the face he wore in drawing rooms and at dinner tables. It was something rawer than that. My father trusted him completely. 22 years. I know, Beatrice said. You cannot know. My father trusted him too. She met his eyes directly. Not in the same way, but Julian Vane was in and out of your father's house throughout that period, which means he was in proximity to everyone your father knew. My father believed the arrangement was legitimate. He believed it because your father believed it. And when Julian told your father the money was never returned, your father told people. Quietly, the way men do when they want something to spread without being seen to spread it. Edward looked at her. That's how the story started, she continued. Not with a formal accusation, with a grieving old man telling his friends that the Holloways had failed him. And those friends told other friends. And by the time it reached the clubs and the dinner tables and the letter your father left you, it had the weight of established fact. He crossed the room. He sat in the chair behind his desk, not with the authority of a man taking command, but with the heaviness of one who needs to be horizontal in some sense, and a chair is the closest available option. He was in this house last night, Edward said. Julian. I told him I was meeting with Pemberton. He told me. A short, humorless sound that was not quite a laugh. He told me it was your influence, that you had gotten inside my thinking. He came to see me as well, Beatrice said. 3 weeks ago, the day after I received the anonymous letter. Edward looked up sharply. The anonymous letter told you about Julian? No. It told me my father didn't destroy your family. Julian came afterward to warn me off asking questions. He dressed it as a social call. He said it would be a shame if anything complicated our arrangement. She tilted her head slightly. He was very polite about it. He always is. Something shifted in Edward's face, the recognition of a pattern he had been too close to see. He told me, Edward said slowly. When I first raised the possibility of this marriage, he told me it was a fitting resolution, that a Holloway in this house would balance the account without any ugly legal proceedings. I thought he meant financially. He meant permanently, Beatrice said. If I marry you believing my family owes yours a debt, and you marry me believing you are collecting it, then Julian never has to explain where the money went. The story closes. Both families have resolved the matter privately. No one looks at the sub-account. No one asks questions about March of 1881. The room was very quiet. He arranged this marriage, Edward said. Not a question. The voice of a man fitting the last piece into a picture he wishes he had not had to see. He suggested it. I thought it was my own idea. I thought I had decided. He pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. He suggested it. 8 months ago. He said it was the elegant solution. Yes, Beatrice said. Edward stood. He moved around the desk and to the door in 3 strides and called for his butler. Send for Hartley, he said. Now, and tell my secretary to cancel everything before noon. He turned back into the room. His eyes found Beatrice and held there. I owe you an apology, he said. You owe me the truth, she said. The apology can wait. Hartley arrived within the hour, slightly breathless, with 2 additional documents he had pulled first thing that morning from the Ashbourne family records. He spread them on the desk between Edward and Beatrice, because she was still there, which Hartley acknowledged with only the briefest flicker of professional surprise before proceeding. The documents were ledger pages. Internal Ashbourne accounting from the period between 1880 and 1883. Julian had been meticulous. There were entries for the Holloway sub-account carefully noted as outstanding never cleared, flagged as unresolved. He had constructed a paper trail that looked from inside the Ashbourne records exactly like the story he had told. He built it in both directions, Hartley said. The Ashbourne records showed the debt outstanding. He would have ensured the Holloway records showed the same. Anyone examining either set in isolation would find exactly what they expected to find. Except for the bank transfer, Beatrice said, which was never supposed to surface, because... Hartley paused. He looked slightly uncomfortable with what he was about to say. Because Thomas Reed was supposed to have left England. Edward went very still. Explain that. Hartley set down a 3rd document. This came from Cresswell and Associates this morning. Pemberton requested it on Lady Beatrice's behalf. It is a record of a retainer paid to one Mr. Gerald Foote, a private inquiry agent in October of 1882. The retainer was paid by Cresswell on behalf of an unnamed client. The instructions were to locate a Mr. Thomas Reed formerly employed by Lord Holloway, and to the phrase used is strongly encourage his relocation to the continent. He tried to drive Reed out of the country, Edward said. He tried. Reed refused. The inquiry agent reported that Reed had taken lodgings in Leeds and showed no intention of leaving. After that, Vane apparently concluded that Reed without the documents was not a significant threat, because Reed alone without records could only offer testimony which could be dismissed. Except Reed kept everything, Beatrice said. 8 years. Hartley nodded. The bank records the receipts a copy of the original agreement, and... He looked at the packet Thomas Reed had given her, which she had brought in her bag that morning. 2 letters. Beatrice opened the packet and removed the 2 letters. She had not shown them to Hartley or Pemberton yet. She had wanted to wait until she was in this room. She put them on the desk. They were from Julian Vane. Written to the late Duke in late 1881, after the money had already been returned, after the sub-account had already absorbed it. The letters told the Duke in Julian's careful and compassionate hand that he had done everything possible to recover the Holloway funds, that he had personally intervened, that regrettably the money appeared to be gone. The ink was faded. The paper was genuine. And at the bottom of each letter in Julian's distinctive signature, the looping V, the precise terminal flourish, was the proof that he had looked a dying man in the face and lied to him systematically for months in writing. Edward read both letters standing up. He read them slowly. He read them the way a man reads something he will never be able to forget. When he finished, he set them down carefully, squaring their edges against the desk, as if precision were the only thing available to him right now. "I want to see him," he said. "Your Grace," Hartley began. "Not yet." Beatrice put her hand on the edge of the desk, not touching Edward, not reaching for him, just grounding herself in the physical reality of the room. "If you go to him now before we have decided how to proceed, he will have time to prepare. He is very good at preparing." Edward looked at her. Something in his expression was different from anything she had seen on his face before. Not the formality, not the cold precision, not even the raw shock of the last hour. Something that was paying attention to her in a way that was not about assessment or strategy. "What would you do?" he said. She had not expected him to ask. The surprise of it showed just briefly before she could manage it. "I would take everything we have to the bank directly. The transfer records are Barclays records. They can verify their own documents independently of anything Vane might say. Once the bank has confirmed the truth of the transfer, Julian cannot argue fabrication. The record exists in their ledgers." She paused. "After that, I would let Hartley determine how to proceed legally. And I would not speak to Julian until we had those confirmations in hand." Hartley was looking at her with the expression of a man who has revised his opinion of someone significantly upward and is not certain how to manage the revision. "That is," he said carefully, "exactly correct." Edward looked at his solicitor, then back at her. "Can you be here this afternoon when Hartley returns from the bank?" She thought of the wedding, one day away, the dresses, the flowers. Her mother, who did not yet know the full scope of what had happened in the last 12 hours. "Yes," she said. She went home to her mother. She told her everything. All of it. Thomas Reed, the bank, transfer the letters. What Hartley had found, what she had seen on Edward's face when he understood what Julian Vane had done to his father. Her mother sat through it without interrupting. When Beatrice finished, Lady Holloway was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, "Your father knew something was wrong. At the end he knew. He just couldn't find the shape of it." "He found Thomas Reed," Beatrice said. "Reed was still there, keeping everything. He believed that eventually someone would come looking." Her mother closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she looked different, not younger, not lighter, but somehow more solid, as if something that had been slowly removing weight from her bones for 8 years had stopped. "What happens now?" her mother said. "Now we wait for the bank to confirm, and then—" Beatrice stopped. "Mother, the wedding is tomorrow." "I know. Everything we have planned, the guests, the arrangements." "Beatrice." Her mother reached across and took her hand, firmly. The way she had taken it when Beatrice was small and frightened, and needed to understand that the world was survivable. "Do you want to marry him?" Silence. Not because she didn't have an answer. Because the answer was more complicated than yes or no, and she had not yet allowed herself to fully examine it. She thought about Edward at the window this morning, carrying 8 years of his father's lie without knowing it was a lie. She thought about the way he had looked at her when she showed him the forged seal, not with the certainty of a man who had already decided, but with the shaken attention of one who had just realized he might have decided too soon. She thought about him asking what she would do, and meaning it. "I was going to marry me for revenge," she said. He told himself it was justice, but it was the same thing. He wanted someone to carry the cost of what he believed had happened. And now he knows the truth. "That's not what I asked." Beatrice looked at her mother's hand over hers. "I don't know yet," she said. "Whether what we are to each other is something real or something we built around a wrong assumption. I don't know who he is when the assumption is removed." "Then find out," her mother said simply. "You have until tomorrow morning." Hartley returned at 3:30. The bank had confirmed everything. The March 1881 transfer existed in their records, a completed transaction from the Holloway account to an Ashbourne sub-account registered under Julian Vane's authority. The funds had remained in that sub-account for 3 months before being moved to a private account held under the name of a property firm Beatrice did not recognize. Hartley had the name of the firm. He had already sent an inquiry. "How much did he take?" Edward said. Hartley told him the figure. The room went very quiet. It was not a small number. Edward sat with it for a moment. Then he said very evenly, "He spent 22 years advising this family. He attended my father's funeral. He sat in this house for my father's wake and helped my mother receive guests, and—" He stopped. "He attended the reading of the will and said nothing." "Men who can do this sort of thing," Beatrice said, "are very good at saying nothing." He looked at her. "How are you this calm?" "I'm not calm. I've been angry since I was 16 years old." She met his eyes. "I've had more practice containing it than you have." Something in that landed. She could see it. "I want to confront him," Edward said. "Tomorrow," Hartley said firmly. "After the wedding is resolved one way or another. If you confront Vane tonight and word gets out, the morning papers will have something by breakfast, and we will lose control of how this story is told before we have decided how to tell it." Edward looked at Beatrice. "He's right," she said. "Julian will not run. He has no reason to. He doesn't know yet how much we have. And a man like Julian understands that running is more damaging than facing the charge. So we wait. We wait until tomorrow afternoon. And then you face him with everything." A pause. "Together, if you'll allow it." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded, not the formal nod of social acknowledgement, but something smaller and more real. Hartley gathered his documents. He said he would be back first thing in the morning. He left with the compressed energy of a man who had more to do before nightfall than he could comfortably manage. The room was quiet again. It was just the two of them, and a desk covered in the evidence of 8 years of careful, patient, ruinous deception. "I need to tell you something," Edward said. She waited. "When I agreed to this marriage, when Julian suggested it, and I accepted, I told myself I was being reasonable, that it was a practical resolution, that I wasn't acting from something worse." He looked down at the desk. "But I was. I wanted someone to answer for what I believed happened to my father, and you were the only one still alive who could." "I know," she said. "Tried again. You deserved none of this. Not the marriage arranged for the wrong reasons. Not the forged document. Not the 8 years before that of carrying a name that had been blackened by something your family didn't do." He looked up. "I am telling you this now because I need to say it clearly before tomorrow. Before anything else, I am sorry." Beatrice held very still. She had spent a long time in the quiet architecture of her self-control, not letting herself want this. Not the apology specifically. She had known at some level it would come if the truth came. But this version of it, the plainness of it, a man who had been wrong admitting it without dressing it in justification. "I heard you," she said. "That's not... I know it's not forgiveness. I'm not there yet." She held his eyes. "But I heard you. And that is not nothing." He accepted that. He did not press for more. That she thought, that restraint, that willingness to take what was offered, and not demand what wasn't told her something. She gathered her things. She stood. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "Whatever happens, I need to know one thing before we stand in that church." He was watching her. "I need to know," she said, "whether you are marrying me because it is still the convenient solution, or whether you are marrying me because when this is over, when Julian is faced, and the truth is established, and there is no debt, and no revenge, and no reason left, except the actual reason you still want to." She did not give him time to answer. She had not asked it for an answer tonight. She had asked it so that he would carry it through the night and know that she meant it. She left the study. She walked down the stairs and through the hall and out into the square where her carriage was waiting. The driver asked if she was ready to go home. She said yes. She did not look back at the house. What happened that evening she learned only afterward. Edward went to find Julian. Not to confront him. Not to accuse him. He had promised Hartley he would wait, and he kept that promise in the technical sense. He did not produce the documents, did not name what he knew. But he went to Julian's club at 8 o'clock and sat across from him and looked at him for a long time. The way you look at someone when you are seeing them for the first time, after years of looking without seeing. "Something troubles you," Julian said pleasantly. "You look as though you haven't slept." "I've been thinking," Edward said, "about my father." Grief does not simply resolve itself, even after many years. No. Edward held the older man's gaze. It doesn't. Especially when the thing you have been grieving turns out to be different from what you believed it was. A silence. Tiny. Controlled. "I don't know what you mean," Julian said. "No," Edward said. "I didn't expect you would." He stood. He left. Julian sat in his chair for a long time after Edward's back disappeared through the door. He ordered another drink. He sat with it without drinking it. He was still sitting there when the club's clocks struck 10. He was thinking as men like Julian think in moments like this, not with panic, which was amateur, but with the practiced efficiency of someone assessing exposure and calculating options. He thought about the bank records. He thought about Thomas Reed. He thought about a woman arriving at Grosvenor Square without an appointment on the morning before her wedding and being shown directly to the study. He thought about a cracked seal. He ordered a second drink. He began very quietly to plan. He did not yet know that Hartley had the bank's confirmation in writing, sitting in a locked file in an office on the Strand. He did not yet know that Reed was in London, not Leeds, housed quietly at Mrs. Caulfield's on Mortimer Street under Geoffrey's supervision. He did not yet know that every document Beatrice had assembled, and everything Hartley had gathered independently, was already in the hands of a second solicitor. A precaution Pemberton had taken that afternoon without being asked, sending copies to his own firm's archive, where they could not be reached by any intervention Julian might attempt overnight. He did not know any of that. What he knew was that the ground was shifting, and that men who had built their lives on a particular version of the past needed to move before that version was replaced. By midnight, he had decided what to do. By morning, he had done it. And everything Beatrice thought she had secured was suddenly dramatically not where she had left it. The message reached Beatrice at 6:45 in the morning, not from Edward, not from Hartley. From Geoffrey, who had spent the night at Mrs. Caulfield's watching over Thomas Reed, and who had sent his own footman running to the Holloway house with a note that contained only 7 words. Reed is gone. Someone came for him last night. Beatrice was dressed in 12 minutes. She did not wait for the carriage to be properly readied. She told the driver to bring it around as it was, and left the house before her mother came downstairs. She reached Mortimer Street in under 20 minutes. Geoffrey was in the front room, looking the way young men look when they have failed at something and know it. His cravat was crooked. He had not slept. "I was here at midnight," Geoffrey said. "I checked on him at midnight. He was in his room. The documents were on the table. I went to sleep at the end of the hall. At 4 o'clock I heard the front door. By the time I reached the stairs," he pressed his hand to his face. "He was gone. The documents were gone. All of it." "Was anything broken?" Beatrice asked. "Any sign of force?" "None. Mrs. Caulfield says the front door was unlocked from the inside. Reed left on his own." She stood with that for a moment. Reed had left willingly, in the middle of the night, taking everything. "Someone got to him," she said. "Between midnight and 4 o'clock, someone either came to him directly or sent word that frightened him badly enough to run." Geoffrey looked miserable. "I should have stayed awake. It wouldn't have mattered." She was already moving. "If Julian Vane decided to remove Reed from the equation, he would have found a way to do it, whether you were in the hallway or not." She paused at the door. "Did Reed say anything to you yesterday? Anything unusual?" Geoffrey thought for a moment. "I was nervous all day. More nervous than when I first brought him here. He kept looking out the window. At about 9 o'clock he asked me whether the Duke knew he was in London. What did you tell him?" "I said I didn't think so, that we had been careful." "And after that?" "He was quiet. He didn't eat much at dinner." Geoffrey met her eyes. "Beatrice, what if someone told him the Duke knew? What if someone sent word that it wasn't safe? He'd been hiding in Leeds for 8 years. The first sign of exposure, and he might simply run again," she said. "Yes." She went back to the carriage. She told the driver Grosvenor Square. She had no documents. She had no witness. She had Hartley's bank verification from yesterday, which was already in a solicitor's archive and could not be removed. That much Pemberton had secured. But without Reed's packet, without the original receipts, without the 2 letters from Julian to the late Duke, what they had was a bank record that Julian would dispute, and a story that, without corroboration, was the word of a young woman about to marry into a family she needed to impress. She knew exactly how that looked. She also knew that it did not matter how it looked if she could make the bank record speak loudly enough without the rest. What she did not know until she arrived at Grosvenor Square and found Hartley already on the doorstep, with a face like a winter morning, was that the situation had become considerably more complicated in the 8 hours since she had left. Hartley drew her into the downstairs study before she could reach Edward. That alone told her something was wrong. "Barclays sent a letter this morning," Hartley said. "Not to me, to His Grace directly." He produced it. "They are notifying him of an unresolved matter relating to a sub-account registered under Ashbourne authority. The account and continues to hold a contractual obligation attached to a parcel of Ashbourne land in Derbyshire. The original arrangement used that land as collateral for the sub-account's operations. If the account's discrepancies are not resolved within 30 days, the bank has the right to call the underlying note." Beatrice looked at the letter. Julian used Ashbourne land as collateral for the sub-account he was hiding the Holloway money in. It appears so, which means the money that should have gone to the late Duke was moved through an account that was technically secured by Ashbourne property. If that account is now scrutinized and found fraudulent, the contractual terms of that security arrangement may allow the bank to pursue the underlying asset. They could take the Derbyshire land, or force a settlement that would amount to the same thing. The land is not the most valuable Ashbourne holding, but it is significant, and more importantly— Hartley paused. It was the land the late Duke cared most about. It had been in the family for 6 generations. His Grace knows this. She understood immediately why Hartley had intercepted her. "Where is Edward?" "He sent for Julian 20 minutes ago." She was through the door before Hartley could say another word. She found them in the formal receiving room. The room Edward never used for anything real, which meant he had chosen it deliberately to put distance between himself and whatever he was about to say. Julian was there. Immaculate as always, seated in the chair opposite Edward, with the composed expression of a man who has survived many difficult conversations and expected to survive this one. Edward was standing. He looked up when she entered, and something in his face shifted. Not relief exactly, but the change of a man who has been alone with something and is glad for the company, even if he would not say so. Julian looked at her with the pleasant smile that meant nothing. "Lady Beatrice," Julian said, "I hadn't expected you this morning, given that you're to be married in—" He glanced toward the clock, approximately 4 hours. "Reed is gone," she said, to Edward, not Julian. She watched Julian's hands, the same place she had always watched. They were completely still, which told her everything. A man startled by unexpected news moved even slightly. A man who already knew did not. "You knew," she said. Julian looked at her with the patience of someone dealing with an accusation they have rehearsed for. "I don't know what you mean by that," he said. "I heard nothing about any Mr. Reed. You sent someone to frighten him." "Lady Beatrice, I understand you are under considerable stress this morning." "Don't." The word was quiet and completely flat. "I have been polite to you for 3 weeks because politeness was the only tool I had. I no longer need it." The room went absolutely still. Edward was looking at her. Julian was looking at her. And she was looking at Julian with the accumulated weight of 8 years of watching her family's name slowly destroyed by a man who sat in exactly this kind of chair, in exactly this kind of room, and smiled exactly this kind of smile. "Your Grace," Julian said, turning to Edward with the deliberate movement of a man repositioning on a battlefield. "I came this morning because I was concerned. There are clearly documents in circulation documents that Lady Beatrice and her family have produced, which misrepresent the history of the 1879 arrangement. I want to help you navigate this correctly before any hasty decisions are made." "The bank wrote to me this morning," Edward said. Julian's composure held, just barely. But she caught it the smallest pause before his next breath. "The Derbyshire account," Julian said. "Yes, I was aware that matter would need to be addressed." "You were aware," Edward repeated. "It was a complex arrangement. The account was set up to manage interim capital movements during a period when your father's financial affairs required—" "Stop." Edward's voice was very quiet. "I have the bank's confirmation that money was transferred from a Holloway account into that sub-account in March of 1881. The full amount your father was owed. I have it in writing from Barclays. I have it verified independently by Hartley." Julian said nothing. "The money came back," Edward said. "The debt was paid, and you told my father it wasn't." A silence so complete that Beatrice could hear the fire in the grate. "You told a dying man that he had been robbed," Edward said. "You sat in his room in this house, and you told him his name had been dishonored. And he believed you. And he died believing it. And he left me a letter telling me to remember what the Holloways had done." His voice did not rise. It got quieter with each sentence, which was worse. "I have spent 8 years remembering. I arranged a marriage around it. I brought a woman into this house to carry a debt she did not owe." Julian looked at him for a long moment. Then, with the precision of a man selecting his last viable position, he said, "The late Duke understood that certain arrangements required flexibility. He was not as uninvolved as you might prefer to believe. If you pursue this, Your Grace, you will discover things about your father's conduct that I do not think you will find comfortable." The room changed. Beatrice saw Edward's jaw tighten. She saw the specific shape of the threatland, not the content of it, but the structure. Julian was saying, "Come after me, and I will destroy your father's name, along with my own." She had been waiting for this. She had known it was coming since Hartley told her about the sub-account. "Mr. Hartley," she said without turning from Julian. Hartley was in the doorway. "Is the Derbyshire land the only Ashbourne holding attached to that sub-account?" "Yes, my lady." "And the sub-account, was it registered in the late Duke's name, or in Sir Julian's?" A pause. "Sir Julian's name exclusively." She looked at Julian. "If the account was in your name exclusively, then anything that account was used for was your decision. Not the late Duke's. Not Ashbourne estate policy. Yours." She let that sit for one breath. "If you had implicated the late Duke in the arrangement, the account would have been joint. It isn't. You protected yourself legally by keeping his name off it, which means when this reaches a court, and it will reach a court, the only name attached to the fraudulent management of those funds is yours." Julian looked at her. For the first time since she had known him, the smile was entirely absent. "You are very well prepared," he said. "I had good reason to be," Beatrice said. What happened next took 20 minutes and had the feeling of a structure being disassembled from the inside. Julian did not confess. Men like Julian did not confess in rooms, but he stopped denying, which in the language of such men amounted to the same thing. He shifted instead to negotiation, the instinct of someone who has run out of cover and is assessing the cost of a settlement. "What is it you want?" he said, addressing Edward, not her. "I want to know one thing," Edward said. "Before anything else, before Hartley and the lawyers and whatever comes after, I want to know one thing." He leaned forward slightly. "Did my father know at the end? Did he know what you had done?" Julian was quiet for a long time. "Answer him," Beatrice said. Julian turned his walking stick once in his hands, the gesture of a man reaching for something to hold on to. "No," he said finally. "He did not know." "You're certain?" "I am certain. He was—" A pause. Something moved through Julian's face that was not quite remorse and not quite the absence of it, but something in the territory between. "He was not himself at the end. He believed what I told him because I was the only one explaining it to him. He was frightened and confused, and he trusted me." A long beat. "He did not know." Edward absorbed that. She watched him absorb it, the specific grief of a man learning that the person he loved died deceived, but not betrayed from within. That the story his father carried to his grave was not one he had chosen, but one he had been given. It did not fix anything, but it mattered. She could see that it mattered enormously. Hartley entered fully from the doorway. "Your Grace, the 30-day notice from Barclays. I believe I can begin the process of addressing the underlying account today, if you authorize me to act on the discrepancy. It will require a formal complaint to the bank regarding the account's management." "File it," Edward said. Julian stood. He held himself with the remnants of his composure reassembled with the speed of long practice. "I will need to speak with my own counsel." "Yes," Edward said. "You will." Julian walked to the door. He paused there, not looking back, just pausing the way a man pauses when he is aware that what he is leaving is irretrievable. "For what it's worth," Julian said to no one in the room specifically, "I believed your father's name needed protection more than the truth did. I told myself that for many years. A pause. I am not certain I was wrong at the beginning. I am quite certain I was wrong at the end. He left. The front door of Ashbourne House closed. His carriage pulled away. Beatrice stood in the sudden quiet and let herself breathe for the first time since Geoffrey's note had arrived that morning. They were alone. Hartley had gone to draft the bank complaint. The staff trained to the particular discretion of old houses had made themselves invisible. Edward sat down. For the first time in the hours she had spent in this house, he sat. Not as a duke manages a crisis, but as a man who has reached the end of something and does not yet know what comes next. "Reed," he said. "We still don't have Reed. We don't need him now. The bank records exist in Barclay's own ledgers. Julian's account is in his name alone. Hartley has the documentation from yesterday. What Reed carried was corroboration, important corroboration, but not the foundation." She sat across from him. "The foundation is already in Hartley's files. Julian will fight this. He will. It will be slow and expensive and visible." She looked at him steadily. "Are you prepared for that?" "Are you?" he said. "I've been prepared for it since I was 16. She held his gaze. "The question is whether you are willing to have this played out in daylight. Because the moment Hartley files the bank complaint, it becomes a matter of record. Your family's name will be connected to it not as wrongdoer, but as the party that uncovered it. That is a different kind of attention than what you are used to." Howe was quiet for a moment. Then, "My father spent the last year of his life believing his honor had been stolen from him. If I protect the family name by keeping this quiet, I am doing exactly what Julian did, choosing the story over the truth." She did not answer. She let him hear what he had just said. "File it," he said. "Whatever comes from it, file it." She nodded. Then he said very quietly, "The wedding." "Yes, it is." He looked toward the window where the morning light had shifted to mid-morning without either of them noticing, in less than 3 hours. "I know. You asked me last night to know my own mind, whether I wanted this marriage as a solution or as a—" He stopped, started again differently. "I have been thinking about what you said, all night, through all of this morning." He looked at her. "I have been thinking about the fact that you came here, not because the documents required it, not because Pemberton sent you. You came because you understood what it was going to feel like to learn that my father had been used, and you thought I should not be alone in the room when I learned it." She said nothing. "That is not the behavior of a woman conducting a transaction," he said. "That is the behavior of someone who—" He did not finish. "Someone who what?" she said. The silence between them was different from all the silences before it. Not formal, not careful, not managed. "Someone who sees me," he said. "Not the title, not the debt, not the history." A pause. "Me." Beatrice looked at him for a long, honest moment. She thought about her mother asking whether she wanted to marry him. She thought about herself answering that she didn't know yet who he was without the wrong assumption built around him. She thought she was beginning to know. "The guests will have begun to arrive," she said. "Yes." "My mother will be wondering where I am." "Yes." Neither of them moved. What broke the stillness was not sentiment or resolution. It was a knock at the door, Hartley's clerk with a message from Pemberton's office. Thomas Reed had contacted Pemberton directly. Not Geoffrey. Pemberton. He had sent a messenger to the solicitor's office at 7 that morning, just as Beatrice had been rushing to Mortimer Street with a letter that Pemberton had only just received and read. Hartley's clerk read it aloud. Reed had not been frightened away by Julian. He had left of his own will, deliberately taking the documents with him, because someone had slipped a note under his door at midnight. Not from Julian. The note said only, "They know where you are. Move the papers somewhere Julian cannot reach them tonight." Reed did not know who sent it, but he had taken the documents to Pemberton's office in person at 5 in the morning, before the office opened, and pushed them through the mail slot in a sealed packet addressed to Aldous Pemberton, with the words "for safekeeping" on the outside. The packet was sitting in Pemberton's office right now. Every receipt. Both letters. All of it. The clerk finished reading. Set the message down. Edward looked at Beatrice. Who sent Reed the note? She had already been thinking about this since the clerk began reading. She turned it over, examining it the way she had learned to examine things, looking for the thing that didn't fit the detail that pointed somewhere unexpected. Someone who knew Reed was at Mortimer Street. Someone who knew Julian would move against him. Someone who wanted the documents safe, but did not want to be identified. Only a handful of people knew Reed was in London. She thought about the anonymous letter she had received 3 weeks ago. Do not marry the Duke of Ashbourne. Your father did not destroy his family. No return address. No signature. But the writer had known exactly what had happened 8 years ago. She thought about who in the entire architecture of this story had been present for all of it. Who had known the truth from the beginning or close to it. Who was old enough, positioned enough, close enough to both families to have carried this knowledge for years. Not Julian. Julian would never protect the documents. Not Hartley. Hartley had not known until yesterday. She thought about the late Duke. About a dying man, confused, trusting. About Julian sitting with him in his final months. About who else might have been in that house. She thought about the crack in the seal. Her father had mentioned the crack to one person outside the family. She was certain of this because she remembered the conversation she had been 17, sitting in her father's study, watching him stamp a letter when he had dropped the stamp and it had cracked, and he had looked at it and said, "Well, now it's mine in a way it wasn't before." And the only other person in the room had been Thomas Reed. Which meant Reed had known about the crack too. Which meant Reed was the one person who could have written the original anonymous letter. Who would have known what detail to include to make her trust it? Reed sent the note, she said, to himself, as a reason to move the documents somewhere they'd be safe but framed, so Geoffrey wouldn't try to stop him. Edward stared at her. He protected the documents by pretending he was running from them. He's been protecting them for 8 years. He knows exactly how to do it. She stood. He also sent the original letter. 3 weeks ago. He knew I was about to marry you. I was trying to tell me to look closer before it was too late. The clerk was looking between them with the expression of someone watching something he will tell his family about for years. Hartley arrived back at the doorway. Your Grace, the bank complaint is ready for your signature. Edward stood. He crossed to the desk. He signed it. He looked up at Beatrice. The documents are safe. Yes. Julian cannot reach them. No. And the bank complaint is filed as of this morning. Yes. Howe was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not relief. Not the managed composure of a duke, resolving a crisis, but something open and unguarded, and somewhat astonished, as though he had come through a fire, and arrived somewhere he had not expected to be standing. Then there is only one thing left to decide, he said. She waited. You asked me last night whether I was marrying you for the reason that is left when everything else is removed. He held her gaze without flinching. When there is no debt, no revenge, no arrangement, no wrong assumption. Just a woman who came to my house this morning because she thought I shouldn't be alone. A pause. The answer is yes. If you'll still have me. Not because of what we were to each other a week ago, but because of what I have seen you do this week. Another pause, smaller. And who I think you are. The clock on the mantelpiece showed 11:27. The wedding was at 2. She had time. They had time. Just enough of it. I will need to go home, she said, and tell my mother what has happened. Yes. And change. Because I am not getting married in yesterday's walking dress. Something broke across Edward Ashbourne's face that she had not seen there before and would remember for a very long time afterward. It was not the controlled, almost amusement she had first encountered at the Fairfax ball. It was something much more genuine than that, something that started in his eyes and moved through his entire expression like light through a window when someone finally opens the curtain. He almost laughed, caught it, but not entirely. No, he said. I suppose not. She turned toward this door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. Edward, she said. It was the first time she had used his given name. He went still. When this is over, the lawyers, the bank, all of it. I want to hear what your father was actually like. Not the man in the letter. The real one. She looked back at him. I think my father would have liked him if they had been allowed to know each other honestly. He looked at her for a long moment. I think, he said quietly, that you might be right. She went home. The morning had 3 hours left in it, and somewhere across the city, Aldous Pemberton was sitting in his office with a sealed packet that contained the full truth of 8 years, and Julian Vane was somewhere talking to lawyers, and Thomas Reed was somewhere drinking tea and pretending to be invisible as he had always done, and 2 families that had spent 8 years carrying a lie. Someone else built, were about to stand in a church and begin for the first time from something real. She was home by noon. Her mother met her at the door, not waiting in the drawing room like a woman who expected a report, but standing in the entrance hall with her coat still on, as if she had been about to go out and look for her daughter herself. Beatrice told her everything in 12 minutes. Standing in the hall, still in her walking dress, no tea, no sitting down, just the bare shape of it. Julian, the bank complaint, the documents at Pemberton's office. Read the note. The packet pushed through the mail slot at 5 in the morning. Her mother listened without interrupting. Her face moved through several things. Shock, then a kind of cold fury, then something quieter and harder to name. When Beatrice finished, Lady Holloway stood very still for a moment. Your father, she said finally. He knew something was wrong with the account. That last year. He kept asking me if I thought Julian had always been an honest man. A pause. I told him yes, because I believed it. Father was right to question it. He just didn't have what he needed to prove it. No. Her mother reached out and straightened the collar of Beatrice's dress. A small gesture. The kind of gesture that carried the weight of everything a mother cannot say. But you did. Beatrice caught her mother's hand and held it for a moment. I need to dress, she said. Yes, her mother said. You do. The church was St. George's, Hanover Square. 200 guests. Flowers that had cost more than a decent horse. A bishop who had known both families for 30 years and who stood at the front with the patient authority of a man who had married earls and dukes and once memorably a minor royal, and who had seen enough of life to know that the people who arrived at his altar were almost never as certain as they appeared. Howe was right about that today, though, not in the way he might have expected. Beatrice arrived at 1:30 with her mother and Geoffrey, who had changed his cravat and looked considerably less guilty than he had at 7 that morning, though not entirely. The church was full. 200 people who knew the Ashbourne name and the Holloway name and the story, or the version of the story they had been given, and who had come to watch the conclusion of it. She walked to the anteroom. She stood in front of the mirror while her mother adjusted the veil. She looked at the woman in the glass and thought, this is the last time you stand in a room without anyone being able to call you Lady Ashbourne. She thought about whether she minded. She found to her own mild surprise that she did not. What happened next was not part of the plan. The door to the anteroom opened. Not her mother, not Geoffrey, not the bishop's assistant with the order of service. Hartley. He looked slightly undone, his hat still in his hand, his expression carrying the compressed urgency of a man who has run from somewhere. I apologize for the intrusion, he said. I would not come if it were not critical. He looked at Lady Holloway. If I might have a brief word with Lady Beatrice alone. Her mother looked at Beatrice. Beatrice nodded. Her mother stepped out with the quiet dignity of a woman who has navigated 30 years of situations that required it. Hartley crossed the room. He spoke very quietly and very fast. Julian has filed a counter-complaint with the bank. His counsel submitted it this morning 90 minutes after His Grace submitted ours. The counter-complaint claims that the original 1879 arrangement contained a secondary clause, a clause in which the Holloway estate agreed to bear any losses arising from the land collateral arrangement. He paused. He has produced a document that appears to contain your father's signature on that clause. She felt it land. The specific weight of the thing. Another forgery, she said. Almost certainly. But his counsel submitted it with a deposition from a witness, a man named Forsyth, a former bank clerk who claims to have been present when Lord Holloway signed it. A paid witness. Impossible to prove that quickly. The bank will suspend both complaints pending a review. The review will take weeks, possibly months. Hartley looked at her steadily. The legal position is manageable. Pemberton has Reed's documents and the bank's own internal records contradict Julian's secondary clause. There is no record of it in the original transaction files. But it will not resolve today. Or this week. He stopped. I needed you to know before you walked down that aisle. His Grace knows. He asked me to tell you himself, but I told him I would come. That it was not his place to be the one to tell you Julian had made another move. She looked at herself in the mirror. White dress, veil, the kind of mourning that contained everything at once. Julian had done it again. One more move perfectly timed, designed to introduce doubt at the moment of maximum exposure. He wants us to stop, she said, or to begin this marriage standing in his shadow. Either one serves him. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. She thought about everything she had assembled, everything Reed had carried for 8 years, everything Hartley had documented. She thought about the bank's own ledgers, the transfer that existed in their records, regardless of what Julian filed. She thought about Forsyth, the paid witness, sitting in a solicitor's office somewhere in London, having signed a document for a man who had been buying silence and testimony for 2 decades. His witness is a former bank clerk, she said. Yes. Meaning he would have had access to the original transaction records. Presumably, for a period of time, yes. Then Pemberton needs to request the bank's employment records for that period. If Forsyth had access to the 1879 files, he also had access to the March 1881 transfer records, which means he knows the transfer happened, which means his testimony that the secondary clause was signed is not only false, it is a lie that he cannot maintain under examination without exposing himself to the bank. Hartley looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who has practiced law for 20 years and occasionally encounters someone who should have. I will send word to Pemberton immediately, he said. Do that. She turned back to the mirror, adjusted the veil herself with steady hands. And tell His Grace that Julian's counter-complaint changes nothing about what I intend to do in the next 40 minutes. Hartley left. Her mother came back in. She did not ask what Hartley had said. She looked at her daughter's face and read everything she needed to know. Are you ready? Lady Holloway said. Beatrice looked at herself one more time. The woman in the glass had her father's eyes and her mother's jaw, and 8 years of something that had not broken her, written in the set of her mouth. Yes, she said. Edward was already at the altar when she entered the church. He turned when the doors opened before the music. Before the congregation rose, he turned, and she knew from 20 feet away that Hartley had told him she knew. She could see it in how he held himself. The particular stillness of a man who has just done something he cannot undo and is waiting to discover whether it was the right thing. She walked. 200 people watching, the bishop, the flowers, the accumulated weight of 2 old families and 8 years of manufactured history, and one morning that had changed everything. She reached the altar. She stood beside him. He said so quietly that only she could hear. Julian filed. I know, she said. Hartley told me. I should have come myself. I was right to come instead. She held his gaze. This is not your crisis to manage for me. It is ours to manage together. There is a difference. Something moved through his expression. He accepted it without argument, which was itself a thing she noted. The bishop began. She said her vows with the full weight of her voice clearly enough that the back rows could hear, because she had decided when she walked through those doors that there would be nothing tentative about this. No performance. No careful management of impression. When it was Edward's turn, he said his with the same quality, the same directness. Not the formal recitation of a man executing a social obligation, but the voice of someone who had spent the previous 12 hours understanding the difference between what he had intended at the beginning of this and what it had become. When the bishop pronounced them married, the congregation applauded with the warm enthusiasm of 200 people who had no idea that the marriage they were celebrating had been entirely rebuilt from its foundations in the previous 72 hours. The reception was at Ashbourne House. It was by all external measure what it was supposed to be. The food was correct. The champagne was excellent. The guests moved through the rooms with the practiced ease of people who had attended many such events, and knew how to fill a house with the appearance of celebration. Beatrice moved through it with her mother on one side, and Edward when protocol required on the other. She spoke to people she had known for years. She smiled at women who had whispered about her family for 8 years, and would now, she knew, reframe their whispering without acknowledging they had ever done it. She was very good at this. She had been trained for it since childhood by a mother who understood that grace under scrutiny was not weakness. It was the most precise form of strength available to a woman in her position. Midway through the afternoon, she found herself briefly alone near the window of the second drawing room. The noise of the reception carried through from the adjoining rooms. She stood in the small quiet between conversations and let herself simply exist for a moment. Julian was not there. He had not been invited to the wedding. She had not known until this morning whether Edward had thought to exclude him before or after the conversation at the club. She did not ask. It did not matter. What mattered was that he was not here, and everything he had spent 8 years building, the careful architecture of accusation and silence and manufactured evidence, was already beginning to come apart under the pressure of its own exposed seams. She was still standing there when Edward appeared beside her. He had extricated himself from a cluster of county landowners with the quiet efficiency of a man who had been doing it all his adult life. He came to stand next to her, not quite touching in the small space by the window. "How are you?" he said. It was the first time in their entire acquaintance that he had asked her that question, as though the answer mattered. "Tired," she said honestly. "And something else I don't have a word for yet." "Something good?" she considered. "Yes, I think so." They stood in the small quiet together for a moment. Outside London went about its business, unaware that inside this house, two people were beginning something that bore almost no resemblance to what it had been designed to be. "I need to tell you something," Edward said. "Before this day is done, and everything becomes the daily business of—" He gestured at the rooms around them. "All of this." She waited. "When I arranged this marriage," he said carefully, "I told myself a story about what I was doing. I said it was justice, resolution, the correct response to an old wrong." He looked at her. "The truth is that I was angry. My father was dead, and I could not reach the person I blamed because he was dead too, and I needed somewhere for it to go." A pause. "I pointed it at you, at your name, at the idea of you, and I dressed it up as principle, because that is what men of my position do with things that are actually just grief with nowhere to land." She was very still. "You deserved none of it," he said. "Not the 8 years before I knew you. Not the 3 months of a courtship I conducted as a transaction. Not the forged document or Julian's visit, or the week you have just survived." He held her gaze without flinching. "I cannot give you those years back. I cannot undo what I believed or what that belief cost your family. But I am telling you clearly now, with nothing left to arrange around it, I am sorry. And I intend to spend however long you will allow me making that mean something in practice, not just in the saying." Beatrice looked at him for a long time. She thought about the 16-year-old girl who had watched her father stop sleeping and not understood why. She thought about her mother's face at the breakfast table in the years that followed. She thought about 8 years of carrying a name that had been quietly blackened by a man who smiled pleasantly and used walking sticks he didn't need. She thought about what forgiveness actually was, not the version that arrived quickly and cost nothing but the real kind, which was more like a decision than a feeling. The choice to stop letting the wound be the thing that defined the relationship to everything that came after. "The truth did not hurt me most," she said. Knowing the truth was actually something like a relief at least. The thing was real. At least it had a shape. She kept her voice even. "What hurt most was knowing that for 8 years, and then for the weeks of our courtship, you never once considered that I might deserve to be heard. That my father's name might deserve examination. That a woman in my position might have something true to say about her own history." He did not look away. "Yes, that is the thing I will need time with," she said. "Not the anger, the erasure. The assumption that what you believed mattered more than what I knew." She held his eyes. "I am not telling you this to punish you. I am telling you because if this marriage is going to be real, and I intend it to be real, Then you need to understand what you are actually asking me to get past. I understand, he said. Then we begin from there. She turned slightly toward the noise of the rooms. And not from a debt, not from a wrong, from there. He nodded. Not the formal nod of social acknowledgement, the other kind. Before we went into that church, he said, I wanted to say something to you. I told Hartley what I intended to say. I had it arranged in my mind. A slight pause. Then you walked through those doors, and everything I had arranged fell apart, because what I wanted to say and what actually needed saying turned out to be two different things. She looked at him. What I wanted to say was formal, he said. What needed saying was this: I asked you to come into this house carrying my family's anger. Everything that has happened in the last 3 weeks, you entered it already carrying something that was not yours and was never yours, and I put more on top of it. He held her gaze. If you enter this house now, if you choose to begin here, I am asking you to enter carrying nothing but your own name, your own history, your father's real history, nothing that Julian built, nothing I assumed. A pause. Nothing but what is actually true. She let that sit for a moment. Let it be what it was. Beatrice Holloway, she said quietly, always knew her father was an honest man. Yes, Edward said. She did. Then she will enter carrying that. A beat. And the understanding that the man beside her is learning how to be honest about the difference between grief and justice, which is not a small thing to learn. Something crossed his face, the realest expression she had ever seen on it. No, he said. It isn't. From the adjoining room came the sound of a glass being struck, someone about to offer a toast, the pleasant noise of a party that believed it was celebrating something it barely understood. She straightened slightly. He offered his arm. She took it. They walked back into the room together, into the noise and the light, and the 200 people who would go home tonight and tell their families they had attended the Ashbourne wedding, which had been very handsome and entirely unremarkable. Who would never know that the 2 people they toasted had spent the morning dismantling the lie that had built the occasion. Who would never know that what they were actually witnessing was not a transaction completed or a debt resolved, but 2 people choosing deliberately, with full knowledge of the cost, to begin something real. The legal proceedings against Julian Vane took 11 months. Pemberton and Hartley were methodical and relentless. The bank's own records ultimately proved definitive. No secondary clause had ever been recorded in their internal files, and Forsyth, the former clerk, collapsed under examination when it became clear that the bank's employment records showed he had left their service in 1878, a full year before the original transaction took place. He could not have witnessed a signing he was not employed to attend. Julian did not go quietly. He fought every document disputed, every date, called every witness he could assemble. He was very good at it. But he had spent his entire career on the assumption that the people he wronged either could not or would not fight back. He had not accounted for a woman who had been waiting 8 years for exactly this, and a man who had decided that the truth his father had deserved in life was the least he could provide him in death. The verdict, when it came, cleared the Holloway name entirely. Every account, every club, every drawing room in London received, in the slow way of society, the revised story that Lord Holloway had been an honest man, that the debt had been paid, that the accusation had been manufactured by the man most trusted to prevent exactly that kind of dishonesty. It traveled the way these things traveled. Quietly at first. Then with gathering speed, as the people who had whispered the wrong story began to whisper the correction, and the correction became the new established fact. Thomas Reed was called to testify. He came from Leeds, not reluctantly, not frightened, but with the upright bearing of a man who had spent 8 years waiting for the chance to say what he had not been safe to say before. He sat in the room and gave his testimony clearly and in full, and when it was done, he looked at Beatrice across the room with an expression she recognized as relief, so old it had become a part of how he breathed. She inclined her head to him. He returned it. The acknowledgement of 2 people who had been in their different ways holding the same truth for the same length of time. She did not see him again after that. She understood that he needed to be done with all of it, and she respected that completely. What she did not expect What neither of them had fully anticipated was the moment that arrived on an evening in November, 4 months into the marriage, when they were sitting in Edward's study after dinner with the correspondence of the day between them. Edward had been reading a letter. He set it down. He looked up. "My mother," he said, "has written to ask if she may come for Christmas." His mother, the Dowager Duchess, who lived on the Somerset property and had stayed carefully at a distance from everything that had happened, had not yet met Beatrice. Had written formally correctly twice, but had not yet appeared in person. "Of course," Beatrice said. "She may be—" He paused, selecting words with care. "She had certain beliefs about your family, formed a long time ago. I have written to her about everything, but reading something and accepting it are not the same thing." Beatrice looked at him. "Are you warning me?" "I am preparing you. There is a difference." She almost smiled. It was such a precise echo of something she had said to him weeks ago that she suspected he had chosen it deliberately. "Then I am prepared," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. He turned back to the letter. She turned back to hers. They worked in the companionable quiet of two people who had learned each other slowly, honestly, without the assistance of romance or simplicity, and who had arrived at something that felt less like the conclusion of a story and more like the beginning of one. Outside November moved through London in the way of November grey, and purposeful, and entirely indifferent to the private histories of the people inside the houses it passed. Inside, the study was warm. The correspondence was ordinary. The fire needed no tending. And the woman who had entered this house carrying nothing but her own name was at last exactly where she had the right to be. A woman does not need the title to prove her worth. What she needs is the truth, the patience to wait for it, and the courage to insist on it, even when the room is against her. Beatrice Holloway had all three. She always had.